Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Paperchain Bookstore. This evening it gives us great pleasure to have Alex McGoldrick's company. He's here tonight with his new book, A Memoir of Arabia. Here to talk about the book is Philip Flood, former Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Thank you, Philip Flood.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Look, I'm delighted and I'm grateful to Alex for the opportunity to talk about what I feel is a really excellent, truly excellent memoir, and it's very nice to be able to do so in front of many friends and old colleagues with whom we've worked in the past. There's hardly a day goes by without being dramatic news from one or other Islamic country, whether it's Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Indonesia, Palestine, or what have you. And the news is always about demonstrations or insurrections, or more likely it's about violence. And for those like Alex and like me who've lived in Islamic countries, it sort of raises the questions: is Islam an intrinsically violent religion? Is there something violent at the core of Islam? And secondly, why is it that women are treated so badly in Islamic societies? And thirdly is, how come is it that predominantly Islamic societies have drifted so far behind the West when they used to be in the forefront of scholarship? Now Alex has the advantage, great advantage over me, that he's lived in Saudi Arabia. He's lived at the centre of Islam, and the King of Saudi Arabia regards himself as the custodian of the great monuments of Islam. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia is a remarkable appointment. It's an unusual appointment in the sense that you're accredited, well, Alex was, to 7 other countries. It's slightly changed now, but it still is multiple accreditations. So whoever is ambassador to Saudi Arabia is also accredited to a whole raft of emirates, sultanates and republics. So Alex was accredited to Bahrain, to Kuwait, to Oman, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and also to the 2 Yemens. The 2 Yemens are now one country. I get a one-line mention in the book. It was my job, on behalf of Bill Hayden, to ring Alex in 1987 and offer him the post of ambassador to Saudi Arabia. He was then ambassador to the OECD, and I had to track him down in Prague, where he's having holiday with Deirdre. And I offered him the posting, and Alex said, because he's an astute and canny man, he said, "I'll think about it." I don't know what was in his mind. Probably he thought this was some cunning and devious foreign affairs plot, that this was some devilish diplomatic trick, that there was some catch in this. But there wasn't a catch. He consulted experts who told him that this was a remarkable opportunity, go for it. And he went for it with a vengeance. And what's more, he's written a book about it. And this is Alex's second book. Those who know him know that he's written the first book about 2 families, about his father's family and his mother's family, which is a really very impressive family biography. This book, his second book, is really an authentic memoir. It's the voice of Alex that comes through in the book. And this is the period that he spent from 88 to 91 living in Saudi Arabia. It's very funny, it's beautifully written, and it makes some astute observations on the Arabian Peninsula as he found it. I think Alex was fortunate, but I think Deirdre might use a different word, and even Alex might use another word, to be ambassador to Saudi Arabia at the time of a war. He was there during the 1991 war. Not many people get to be diplomats in a war zone. Lou Border was ambassador in Vietnam, and a few others were. Tom Critchley was in Korea, Keith Officer in Moscow. Sir Frederick Eggleston was in Nanking in China. It's a pretty elite group who are diplomats during a war. And Alex and Deirdre had dramatic experiences. Very tough on wives, being in your husband's posted in a war zone. You get moved in and out at the whim of people in Canberra, and it's a very unsettling experience for for family. For Alex, it's an experience with gas masks, chemical warfare suits, Scud missiles, flying into Kuwait immediately after the Iraqis had been thrown out, and finding it looked like Dante's Inferno. And Alex scored a tremendous coup. He got Australia 3 hours advance notice of the war. This was 3 hours before President George Bush Sr. rang Bob Hawke. He had some cunning, devilish scheme worked out with a Canadian to give him a coded phone call when the troops were going in, so he knew in advance what was happening. But the best story in the book about the war is about a Kuwaiti businessman that he tells, a Kuwaiti businessman who owned a flash Mercedes, and this was commandeered by an Iraqi officer in Kuwait City. He thought he would never ever see the Mercedes again. And the day after the Iraqis had been pushed out and the Americans had bombed the road, to his great surprise, he saw the Mercedes parked outside a police station, which had no doubt been used by the invading Iraqis as a military post. Well, he walked gently up to his car and to his great surprise found that the keys were still in the car. So he got in the car and he drove it home. And as soon as he got home, he looked in the car and he looked in the boot, and the boot was full of gold bars. This Iraqi officer was obviously clearing out the Baghdad with things that he'd ripped off in Kuwait. But the first thing this fellow did, his neighbour was a builder. The first thing he did was he asked the builder to brick up the carport and lock the car into it, so make sure that he could hang on to the gold bars. But this is sort of jumping ahead. There are wonderful stories in the book about credentials. In most countries it takes 2 or 3 weeks to present credentials, perhaps sometimes slightly longer, but the Saudis have a different sense of time. And there it took Alex 5 months before, in other words, 5 months before he's legal in any of the countries to which he was accredited. So until he's legal in Saudi Arabia, he can't be legal in these other countries of dual accreditation. And he writes memorably of his experience with Charlie Jamison and Carl Lissner, going to see King Fahd and having coffee and rosewater sprinkled on his hands. And then when the ceremony's over, he has to return he was asked to do this in Jeddah, to return promptly to Riyadh. And the protocol officers looking after him didn't notice that the plane to take Alex and his party back to Riyadh was already taxiing out of where the plane was parked and was starting to go to the runway. Well, this didn't daunt the protocol officers. They got into limousines, put the whole party in, and flashed down the runway with lights flashing, trying to stop a high-speed jet. Of course, they failed, and